This happened when I was about 9 years old. I'm 25 now, and it's something I'll never forget. It still gives me chills to this day. I lived in a row house, 4 homes all attached together, and my neighbors and I each had our own porches. There was a little path about 10 meters from my front yard where people would often stroll on Sundays and such. Just a small fence separated my yard and porch from that path. I lived in a pretty busy area with some run-down houses scattered around the neighborhood, so seeing people walking on that path was normal for me. Even strangers standing on my porch didn't faze me much. But when I was 9, I'd get home from school about an hour before my mom, Helen, got back from work. My school was only about 50 meters away, so Helen figured I was mature enough to stay home alone for that hour before she got back. One day I came home after school and did my usual routine. Made sure the front door was locked and double-checked that the back door leading to the porch was locked too. I was only 9, and being home alone was a little scary, even though it was the middle of the day and just for an hour. After that, I bolted upstairs to my room to play PlayStation as much as I could before Helen got home and made me do my homework. While I was playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. My room was upstairs right above the porch, and it looked out onto the path I mentioned earlier. The sound was like a cat meowing, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. A spark of hope flared up and I thought, oh my gosh, it's finally back. I raced downstairs to check if it was my cat, but what I saw froze me in my tracks and sent shivers down my spine. There was a guy standing on my porch, a tall guy with dark hair covering half his face, making him look like a male version of the woman from The Ring or something. I could hear him making these high-pitched noises, almost like a cat's meow. A brown liquid dribbled from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's crushed cigarette butts. He was actually eating from the ashtray. I stood there, paralyzed, watching this. Finally, I snapped out of it and screamed as loud as I could, so loud he must have heard me. But he didn't react. He just kept eating from the ashtray. I ran back upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called Helen. She called the police. I'd never been so terrified in my life. I hid under my bed sheets, trembling, hearing those eerie, piercing noises from the guy eating the cigarette butts and the stomping sounds from the ashtray on the porch. I must have passed out for a moment because the next thing I remember, the police were there on the path by my yard. I could hear them talking to the guy, saying things like, "What are you doing? Come over here now, or we'll come get you," and stuff like that. He didn't answer, but those shrill noises got more frequent and louder. I decided to peek out the window, feeling safer now that the police were there. I could see 2 officers standing by the fence, 1 man and 1 woman. But I couldn't see the creepy guy because he was right below me, 1 floor down out of my line of sight. The police jumped over the fence, and I remember hearing that scary guy scream louder than anything I'd ever heard before. He charged at the female officer, Officer Lena, with all his strength, and knocked her out cold. The male officer, Officer Ryan, immediately tasered him, making him twitch and scream on the ground. Officer Ryan struggled to keep him down while cuffing him, but he managed after a bit. Then he woke up Officer Lena, who seemed badly hurt. He called for backup and an ambulance. Then he looked up and saw me standing at the window. Something about my expression must have stood out because he just stared at me and said, "I'm pretty damn sure you didn't see all that." I started crying then. Neighbors began showing up, wondering what the heck was going on. One of them, an older woman named Mrs. Doris, got me to come downstairs, and she took care of me until Helen got home. The police put the creepy guy in their car and drove off, promising to come back and talk to us about what happened before they left. This is where the story took an unexpected turn. Officer Ryan came back that night and sat down with me and Helen. He explained that the guy on my porch had been diagnosed with severe autism. He'd escaped from a facility for people with disabilities about 5 kilometers from our house. He told us that the guy had actually lived in our house 5 years earlier but had been forced to move out when his mother, his only caregiver, passed away. The poor guy probably thought he'd find his mom in our house. He remembered the routines, the life he had there with her. The police had to move him out of that house 5 years ago because he was incredibly strong. From what I heard, the extreme stress on his body from his autism made his muscles grow stronger every year. That's why he reacted the way he did when the police showed up. Still terrified that day, I told Officer Ryan he needed to make sure this never happened again. He promised it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life went back to normal. Years passed and that guy didn't come back until a year ago. By then, Helen and my dad had moved out, and I'd bought their house. I still live here to this day. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the porch when I saw some random guy stop on the path near my fence. He just stood there staring at me. I looked at him and nodded. Then I heard that piercing noise. Holy crap, it was him. His hair had turned gray, but that shrill sound tipped me off. My heart started racing, and I instantly remembered why he was back. I realized he must have escaped. Again. Since I could stay calmer than I did at 9, I started to feel sorry for the guy. 16 years later, and he was still coming back looking for his mom. I decided to carefully ask if he wanted to come down to the porch. He jumped over the fence, right away. I thought he might knock me out like he did Officer Lena, but he didn't. He smiled. He looked at me and smiled. I invited him to sit down. He didn't answer. I invited him inside, and he started laughing. We went in, and his face lit up with pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he'd had with his mom. It almost brought tears to my eyes. Suddenly he sat on my couch, turned on my TV, and flipped straight to cartoons. I watched him for a while. He was completely focused on the cartoons. I just wanted him to enjoy that moment, so I didn't say anything to him. I realized I had to call the facility to let them know. The caregivers showed up 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he cried again, and they took him back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later, and we worked something out. His name's Victor, and now I consider Victor my friend. Every Sunday since he came back, Victor and his caregivers visit me to watch cartoons. They say it's the highlight of his week. It warms my heart. For years my thought was, don't run into some guy on the porch eating from the ashtray. Now my thought is, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons with my friend Victor. The haunted house behind our place is an old tale my dad, Henry, told me a few times over the years, but with Halloween creeping up, it's been haunting me again. I've never seen the house myself, but the descriptions from a bunch of guys in their 20s who saw it years ago painted such a vivid picture in my mind. To start, I should mention that Henry's a deeply religious man, the son of a missionary, and he doesn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, not even a little. Nothing seems to scare him, but he swears he felt something off that scared the living daylights out of him, even just retelling the story to me. It's one of those rare times he brings it up. Back in the late 80s, he and a few buddies used to go hiking through the waterfalls or creek beds behind our family farm, following trails until they'd eventually hit frontage road off the interstate. One night, they decided to take a different route, looping behind another farmer's land, mostly to check out the animals since they raised crested ostriches and other big, unusual livestock. You don't see much around here. After leaving that area and pressing on into the woods at night, during that awesome stretch of time, they stumbled across something all 5 of those guys, 20 years later, described as a Blair Witch-looking house. It was a really, really old place, and Henry insists that just looking at it gave him an uneasy feeling. But of course, they had to go inside and check it out. The house was a classic cottage-style building, probably built in the late 40s or early 50s, and the group immediately spotted writings, symbols, and weird Latin-like languages scratched into the walls, along with some English graffiti, quoting what seemed like a ritual, something satanic or pagan, they figured, with a few drawings showing how to sacrifice a human soul to some supposed demonic god. Henry still swears to this day that certain symbols were drawn in blood, while others were obviously spray-painted, which I find easier to believe since he'd been a firefighter for years before this happened and had plenty of experience seeing human blood and mangled bodies on the highway after car wrecks. Past a small living area or kitchen was a staircase so narrow their shoulders would brush both walls as they climbed. The stairs went straight up, stopped at a little landing, then turned right, so when you started going up you couldn't see what might be standing at the top. At the head of the stairs, a door led to a big loft-style bedroom where actual handcuffs and padlocks hung on one of the walls near a round window at the far end. That room was completely covered in those strange graffiti symbols too, and now there were big, terrifying, obvious pools of dried blood soaked into the floor and walls. They say when they went upstairs to poke around the room, they swore they heard someone moving up the stairs behind them. Fast. But when they looked back, no one was there. Basically, everyone told me it sounded almost like the clack of heels on wood. Totally freaked out now, they bolted downstairs to see if someone was pranking them and hiding below. Shockingly, they found nothing. No fresh footprints in the dust and dirt, except the ones they'd left coming in. To make things more interesting, I met with each guy separately to ask what they remembered, hoping to find some crack or something to prove they might have exaggerated. But when I asked, I got the exact same story from each one without a hint of hesitation. Same details down to the minute they walked in and the minute they left. The really weird part, though, is that they left the house and, for some reason, they couldn't explain, decided to try walking back from a different route using a compass to approach from the east instead of the south. They tested this over 10 times at night, walking from every possible route or direction, and they always ended up at the house's front entrance, even when the compass and basic knowledge of the area said it was physically impossible to be at the south end of the house when they'd moved in a straight line from the northeast or west. Maybe there's some scientific explanation for that, but I haven't found one yet. These guys knew those woods like the back of their hands and still do to this day. The last time they went back and found themselves standing at the front of the house, they started feeling physically sick, almost feverish, and finally decided it was time to give up when one of them nearly passed out. As they turned to leave, the guy who almost fainted looked back and pointed at the round window at the front of the house on the second floor. Everyone looked, and right away they saw a tall woman's silhouette hunched over, standing at the window, staring at them. They couldn't make out any features on her face except two big black eyes. It shifted slightly in place before turning and walking off, like it was heading toward the stairs at the back of the room next to where the figure had been moving. They all bolted through the woods and ended up on the interstate shoulder about 3 miles from Henry's house, where they'd started. They made it back to Henry's place eventually, though they swear they felt like someone was watching them. The whole way, Henry's cousin Theo got up to grab water from the kitchen, only to say he swore he saw that same silhouette standing outside the kitchen window near the edge of the woods by the woodshed. Luckily, nothing came of that experience beyond a general state of sheer terror whenever the topic comes up. They brushed off what Theo thought was paranoia or some kind of hallucination. 5 years later, though, they decided to go back to see if the house was still standing. Miraculously, it had collapsed into nothing more than a pile of rubble, and they never went back again. I used to joke with Henry and ask what he'd do if he went back and saw the house still standing like nothing had happened, trying to give him a reason to let me go check it out myself. But with trespassing laws being way stricter these days, it's pretty much impossible without getting shot or thrown in jail since it's not on our property. I don't know. It always gives me the creeps thinking about it, but I never took the story seriously until I did a little fake interview with all those guys. And when I say these grown men were scared stiff by the story, I mean seeing them get worked up and terrified just retelling it really turned me into a skeptic. What do you think? Could they have just panicked and that made them see things? This is what we found. I'm right by my bed near dawn, feeling like I don't have much time left. I can barely see anything anymore. I hope this story serves as a warning to people about what's happening up in the mountains at Pine Hollow. Please stay away from it. God, my eyes itch. There are some things we're not meant to find. Please, someone read this so we're not forgotten. Here's what happened. I got to Pine Hollow 3 days ago. It's as gorgeous as the website bragged. High up in the West Virginia mountains where the air's untouched by city smog and grime, and you can feel the purity in every breath. The cabins I'd be maintaining with 2 other summer workers weren't exactly palaces, but they had an elegant, natural charm. Each wooden cabin was decked out with all the usual outdoor trimmings. Animal heads hung silently on the exposed, polished wood walls filling the interiors with a pleasant woody scent, and a fireplace stood ready to burn the neat stack of logs beside it. There were 8 cabins total, 6 for guests, 1 for workers, and 1 for the resort owner, Walter, who lived there year-round. They formed a semicircle along the edge of tall trees, with a space cleared out for a massive fire pit in the middle. Half a mile down the road was a lake where Walter rented out rowboats for guests to use. I asked him when I arrived if the staff could use them for free, and he winked and told me he'd rather his workers stick around. Behind the cabins, a path led into the woods, and about 400 feet from the clearing was where we kept the maintenance gear. Rakes, leaf blowers, a couple of axes, a chainsaw, the usual upkeep stuff. I remember on the first day when Walter showed us an old shed, one of my co-workers, Finn, asked why he kept his job application stashed back there. Walter chuckled and said we'd get it once we were married and vacationing with our own families. He slung an arm over my shoulder and said he'd never seen folks fight worse than up here when most modern conveniences were out of reach. He wouldn't let one of them bring a chainsaw to their significant other, he said, tossing a coin at Nora, the last piece of our worker trio. She glanced at Finn, then at me, her face uncertain and a little nervous. "Don't worry," Walter said. "I've never had trouble here. Real trouble, anyway. Most folks are good. They just want to escape all the nonsense. They come here, roast marshmallows, eat hot dogs, and listen to the silence." Then we all went back to the cabins, and he started walking us through our daily summer tasks and getting the place ready for the first wave of guests arriving the next day. 3 days later, I found I liked being up in the mountains more than I'd expected. The quiet days, the chirps and moans of nature, the warm golden sunlight and the burst of crystal bright stars lighting up the night. Finn, Nora, and I got along great. Honestly, it was weird how well we clicked after just 3 days. We're all outgoing types, and we all wanted something a bit different to fill the gap between semesters. We wanted to head back to college in the fall with unique experiences and adventures to tell our friends. And then there was Walter. He'd been running this place for 28 years. His dad built it, and when he passed, Walter took over. He was proud of it. You could tell from how he worked and how he talked to the guests. He was about 60, but had the spirit of a guy in his 20s, full of energy, kind, and making everyone feel welcome. He had all the guests call him Grandpa Walter, and if anyone wanted, he'd tell stories at dusk about the history of these mountains and the land around us. It was captivating, and I found myself looking forward to that part of the day. That was all before I found that damn thing. Yeah, I was dragging the oars back behind Walter's cabin and wiping sweat off my face with a dirty hand. That was the last time I talked to Finn. Everyone's got to head in today. Nora should be done stacking firewood for tonight's fire. Want to see if she's up for a swim? Finn, tall and lanky, with glasses and blonde hair he kept pushing off the lenses, nodded. Yeah, sounds good. I feel like I'm melting out here. Hot as a hay fever today, huh? I snorted. You're damn right. You go check with Walter, let him know we're done for the day, make sure he doesn't need anything. I'll go help Nora put the tools away. All right. I brushed my hands on my jeans and circled around to the front of the cabins. A few guests were sitting on porches enjoying the shade and starting to unwind for the evening. I spotted Nora by the fire pit, stacking the last few logs. All done? I asked. She looked at me. Yeah, that's it. Hope it's enough. Nora was a sweet girl, nothing flashy, but her charm came from how adorably she always worried she'd get in trouble. I grinned back. It's fine. You really think Walter's gonna yell at you, even if it's not? She shrugged. I just want things to be okay. They are now. Want to swim with Finn and me? He's checking with Walter right now. Her face lit up. Oh, that sounds awesome. Can you stash the axe back in the shed before I change? Sure thing, I said, bending down to pick it up. Thanks, I'll meet you there, she said, heading back to our cabin to get ready. I slung the axe over my shoulder and started down the path into the woods, nodding to guests as I passed. The woods were quiet today, the rustle of wildlife lost in the trees swaying gently under the sun. My boots kicked up dry dirt as I walked, and I wondered when it last rained. As I was about to round the final bend to the shed, something caught my eye. About 30 or 40 steps off the path to the left, I noticed something sticking out of the ground. Curiosity kicked in, and I started toward it, wondering why I hadn't noticed it on my trips back here before. But I'd been more focused on sticking to the path and not getting lost. As I got closer, I saw it was a stone well. The rocky edges jutted up from the ground in the middle of a big clearing. I pushed through the trees and stopped dead. A heavy feeling washed over me, a thick unease churning in my gut. Something made my skin crawl, and I felt goosebumps prickling my arms. I licked my suddenly dry lips and swallowed. A warning light was flashing in my head, and my unease turned into panicked nausea. I didn't even want to look down the well. I turned my eyes away and stood there, unable to move. I tried, telling myself to get out, but an avalanche of unbearable dread flooded me. When I tried to peek down the well, it wouldn't let me. I had to leave. My hands were shaking at my sides, and I realized I'd dropped the axe. I couldn't even pick it up. Why am I being such a kid? I wondered, still frozen. The second that thought crossed my mind, I knew the answer. Because something was down there. I ran. The fear turned into a haunting sense of danger, and I bolted. I stumbled back onto the path and raced to the cabins. My sudden burst spooked a few guests into looking at me curiously. I glanced at them, gave a weak smile, shook my head, and felt kind of dumb. I went looking for Finn and Nora. The fear was fading fast now that I was back around people, and I started feeling ridiculous about the whole thing. My breathing steadied, and my heart slowed. I shook my head, rolled my eyes, calmed down. I found Finn and Nora, and we all strolled down to the lake, swimming in the cool water to wash off the dust and sweat. I decided not to tell either of them about the well, but made a mental note to ask Walter what the deal was after his late-night stories. Good night, folks, and thanks for listening, Walter said as the guests gave him a hearty round of applause. We were sitting around a crackling fire, and Walter had just told us about how this place got built. For such a mundane story, He'd filled it with a booming flair and charm that only old guys seem to have when they tell tales. As the guests thanked Walter and carried their sleeping kids over their shoulders to bed, I edged closer to him. "Can I ask you something quick?" Walter, still seated on the bench by the fire, patted the empty spot next to him. "Sure thing. Kid, sit down." He pulled out a cigar, clipped the end, and struck a match against the wooden bench. I took my spot and watched the last guest retreat to their cabins for the night. Finn and Nora eyed us, curious about what was up. I took a deep breath. "What's with the well behind the shed?" Walter froze, the match hovering a few inches from the unlit cigar. After a second, he lit it and took a few deep puffs before answering. "What do you mean, son?" Finn and Nora had settled on the bench beside us, and Finn piped up, "The well back there?" "There's a well, yeah. It's in that clearing just off the path." I nodded, pointing in its direction. Walter turned his head and looked straight at me. "Don't go near it, you hear me?" The seriousness in his voice jolted me. His Grandpa Walter persona was gone, and his eyes were cold, hard as black stone. "I mean it, son. Nothing good's back there. Just stay away from it." "What's wrong with it?" Nora asked. Walter took another drag, clearly uneasy with the conversation, before replying. "It's dangerous. Something's off about it. I don't know what it is, but I know for damn sure no one's supposed to go near it. Something's not right about it. Best you all keep your distance." Finn leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Is it haunted or something?" I could hear the excitement in his voice. Walter shook his head. "No, no such thing as ghosts. But there are other forces in nature humans aren't meant to mess with." I swallowed hard, remembering the terror from earlier. "Is there something down there, Walter?" He went quiet for a bit, the fire popping, sparks swirling around us. Then he whispered, "Yeah." "What is it?" Finn pressed. "You ever looked down it?" Walter shook his head. "Can't bring myself near that thing. Truth is." He snapped his head back and stared at me hard. "You didn't look down it, did you?" I shook my head. "No, honest, I freaked out just being near it. That's why I'm asking. It felt so out of place compared to the rest of these mountains." Old Walter sighed, but Finn wasn't done. "How do you know something's down there?" Walter tapped his cigar and a chunk of ash fell to the ground. "I had a horse, back when I first took over this camp. He glanced at Nora and cleared his throat. "I don't want to scare Nora here, just listen to me and stay away." "I want to hear," Nora said. He didn't blame her. There was something in Walter's sober tone begging for an explanation. "Fine, you two are grown," Walter said, staring into the fire. "But let me warn you, what I'm about to tell you is pretty damn unsettling." With a sigh, he dredged up old memories. "When I took over this place, I had a horse. Named her Cherry, a beautiful creature. For the first few weeks, it was just me and Cherry. I was fixing up the place, getting it ready for guests. In the evenings, I'd ride Cherry all over these mountains," he said, sweeping his hand across the dark horizon. "Let me tell you, you haven't seen a sunset till you've seen one up here. Anyway, the leaves were changing color. One evening, I tied Cherry to that tree over there," he said, pointing toward the path leading back into the woods. "We were about to go for an evening run. I went inside to wash up and change, no more than 5 minutes. But when I came out, Cherry was gone. Couldn't see her anywhere, but I could hear her," he said, his voice trailing off, trembling with a sly edge. "And she was screaming. Screaming." Nora asked softly, eyes wide. "Screaming. Never heard anything like it before," Walter went on. But I followed the sound down the path, and that's when I found the well for the first time. He paused, puffing his cigar quietly. After a moment, he continued. Cherry was trying to get down the well, even though she was too big. Her hind end was stuck up in the air, head down in the hole, and let me tell you, she was losing it. Her back legs were kicking and clawing at the stone sides, trying her damnedest to shove the rest of her body inside. She was thrashing and wiggling all over while screaming down the hole. His voice started shaking again. But I couldn't do anything for her. I was too scared. Something was stopping me from getting close to that place. I could feel the hairs on my neck standing up. Pretty sure I wet my pants at some point standing there watching. Oh, I was terrified, he said softly. What happened next? Finn whispered. Walter looked around at all three of us, then said, She finally got down it. Took damn near an hour to do it. She wiggled and kicked till she scraped her hide, raw and fit. I've seen plenty of blood in my life. How she was still alive, I don't know. But I stood there, paralyzed, watching her wedge herself into the rock until she finally slid down inside, and she stopped screaming right away. Everything went silent. When he finished, Walter casually flicked more ash from his cigar and stared at the ground. The unbelievable events he'd just shared chilled me to the bone. I remembered how it felt near the well. I shuddered. It was late. Finally, Walter stood and tossed his cigar into the fire. Why don't you kids get some sleep? Tomorrow's gonna be hot. I reckon a lot of guests will want those rowboats. We all got up and wished him good night. We were all shaken and a bit anxious, except Finn, whose eyes were lit up with thrill. We headed back to the cabin and started getting ready for bed. Nora took her own room, brushing her teeth and washing her face, then bid us good night before shutting her door. You okay, Nora? Not scared? I asked. She gave me a wry smile. Not sure I buy everything he said, but it was a pretty creepy story. I'll be fine, thanks. Then she closed the door. I went to the room Finn and I shared, stripped to my shorts and flopped onto my bed. Finn followed and turned off the light. We were quiet for a while. Then I heard him sit up. Dude, let's go check it out. I sat up too, a little nervous. No way, you heard Walter, we should steer clear. Come on, he begged. It'll be spooky as hell. Imagine how cool it'd be to tell Nora tomorrow morning we went down to the well and looked. I snorted. Finn, you weren't there. It scared me shitless. No way I'm going back at night. Just lie down and sleep, please. Drop it. After a moment, I heard him sigh and lie back down. Relieved, I closed my eyes and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come fast. I don't know what time my eyes snapped open, but something was wrong. I jolted upright and let my tired eyes adjust. Finn was gone. Shit, you idiot. What the hell? I didn't peg Finn as the adventurous type, let alone brave. What was he thinking? If he was where I thought, I needed to tell Walter. Now. I'd been there. I knew the story was true, and I knew something about it was dangerous. I considered waking Nora, but decided against it. I stomped into my boots and flung the door open. The night was still. A small, round white moon cast vanilla beams down to greet me. The camp was hushed, sleep blanketing the air. I stepped down the stairs and turned toward Walter's cabin when something caught my eye near the tree line. Finn was walking toward me. He spotted me and flashed a sly grin. Good. You changed your mind? The big fire in the middle of camp from earlier was nearly out, but enough glow remained for me to make out his expression as he came closer. What the hell was he doing? I wondered, my voice a hoarse whisper. Sorry, man, he said. hands in his pockets, shrugging. I just had to see it for myself. Took forever to find it. I stopped, cautious. You found the well?" He nodded, that grin still plastered on his face. I looked at his lips as he clapped my shoulder. "Walter's full of crap. I was scared it's just a dumb well. Nothing down there, man." I let out a breath. "I don't know what I was expecting. You really went and looked down it?" He chuckled and rubbed his eyes. "Yeah, no ghosts or monsters. I was scared for nothing. Just Walter yanking our chain. Good story, though, I'll give him that." I shook my head. "Guess I'm just a big baby then. Tell Nora in the morning I think she was kinda spooked." He laughed. "Will do. I'm totally calling Walter out for trying to freak us out. Let's sleep." As we headed back to our cabin, the dying fire spat its last drops of light onto Finn's face, and I noticed his eyes were bloodshot. He rubbed them again and turned inside. We slept till morning. The next day was hot, as predicted. Most guests wanted to row out on the lake. Walter slipped back into his grandpa routine, helping the three of us make sure they were set and happy. He asked if we could take turns down at the water, keeping an eye on things. Nora said she'd take the first shift, so Finn and I stayed back to handle our daily chores. We ended up not telling her. After a quick talk in the room that morning, we agreed it was better she didn't know since she was always stressing about getting in trouble. If she was scared of Walter's story, she didn't show it while she went about her morning. Finn was chipper despite the heat, helping me prep firewood for that night's fire. His eyes were still red, and when I asked about it, he shrugged. "Guess I caught pink eye in both. Lucky me. They itch like crazy. Think Walter's got any drops for it?" "Maybe. He looks rough," I said, hauling another log to the chopping block. He scratched at them and told us to finish up first. "It's cleanup day. Once we're done with the wood, you go swap with Nora." He didn't end up asking Walter about his eyes, though I pushed him to. He said maybe a swim would clear them up, and I told him not to touch anyone if he kept rubbing them. About half an hour after Finn left, Nora trudged up the hill, her face flushed and sweaty. "You'd never know I was in the water 10 minutes ago. Today's brutal, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'm looking forward to my shift at the lake." "You see Finn?" "Yeah, what's up with his eyes? He thinks it's pink eye." She shivered. "Gross. Poor guy." She scanned the camp. "So, what's left?" "We're cleaning cabins today. Midweek stuff, right?" I stretched my arms over my head. "Yeah, sounds like no fun, huh?" "Walter told me this morning we don't need to hit the water. Deep cleanings for Sundays between guest turns. Just light stuff. Make sure bathrooms are clean, trash out, all that." "All right, let's get to it," she said, and we both went to grab supplies for the afternoon maintenance. Time flew with the two of us chatting and cleaning. The work faded into the background with the sound of conversation and easy laughs. She's a good girl, and I found myself kinda liking her. We didn't get much one-on-one time, and I found her pretty chill. As the sun crawled across the sky like a dying man in the desert, we finished our last cabin. I blinked sweat out of my eyes and sighed when I saw Finn trudging up the hill. He saw us and waved from the middle of camp. His eyes were still red, but looked a lot better than that morning. "Save me, someone," he groaned. Nora grinned. "Any hot moms need rescuing?" Finn threw his head back and laughed. "Afraid not. Just whiny kids and drunk dads. You guys, done cleaning?" "Yeah," I said. "All that's left is raking the grounds. I'll go change and head down to watch folks." We all laughed and split ways. Finn and Nora went for rakes, and I headed to the lake. The year water was cold and gorgeous as the sun sank into a rainbow of colors. I spent the rest of the day swimming and chatting casually with guests. Couldn't think of a nicer way to wrap up a day. That night's story was about Walter's vision for the camp. He told the guests about all the upgrades he wanted to make and how he'd redo the cabins. He got the guests involved, asking for their feedback and taking their input cheerfully. Most had nothing but good things to say. They all thought the four of us were great hosts and couldn't wait to come back next year to see the place. After, the talk died down to whispers and the moon rose high. Folks thanked us again and started heading to bed. Once everyone was inside, Walter told us he was beat and heading to sleep too. We all wished him good night. We went back to the cabin, feeling wiped out ourselves from the heat and day's work. I told Finn and Nora I was hitting the sack. They agreed, and we went to our rooms to crash. "How are your eyes?" I asked Finn as I lay in bed. "Eyes shut tight." He flipped off my bedside lamp and slipped under his sheets. "Still itchy as hell, but I don't think they're as pink as this morning. Maybe they'll be better tomorrow." I mumbled agreement and felt the day slip into sleep. I woke up with my heart pounding. I was drenched in thick sweat, my throat bone dry. Something was off. My breath wheezed through cracked lips into the dead air. I tried to sit up but fell back onto the bed. Something was holding me down. What the hell? I twisted and saw my wrists and ankles tied to the bedposts. Confused and scared, I fought them for a few useless seconds before giving up. I craned my neck to look at Finn's bed. He wasn't there. "Finn," I said loudly. "Finn, where are you?" Silence, then a shh sound came from his side of the room, but I couldn't see him. My heart was still hammering. I stretched my fingers to try flipping on the bedside lamp. My fingertips brushed the switch and I flinched as the rope bit into my skin. "Finn, what the hell's going on? Where are you?" I said, my voice cracking with panic. Silence, then another shh. I didn't know if he was messing with me and I didn't want to start yelling and wake all the guests if he was, so I reached out again, fighting the burning pain in my wrists from the rope. Almost there. I flipped the lamp on and yellow light pushed the darkness back. At first I didn't see Finn, but movement caught my eye. He was under his bed staring right at me. He was smiling, and in horror I saw his eyes were nothing but two bloody, oozing sockets, rubbed raw like he'd clawed them with his nails and torn them out. "They wouldn't stop itching," he said, still smiling. Then he shot up like lightning, scrambling out from under the bed and jumping on top of me. I thrashed, about to scream, when he shoved a rag hard into my mouth. I gagged as his fingers pushed a torn bedsheet deeper in. His thighs pinned my body with an iron grip. "Hold still, bud," he said, his breath dry and reeking of bile. His bloody eye sockets stared down at me and I turned my face away. The gore made me retch. He sat up on me. "Pretty nasty, huh? It's not here, is it? Let me fix that." He reached behind me and ripped the sheet I'd been sleeping on, tying it around his eyes and the back of his head. Blood soaked through, almost giving him two red eyes again. "There," he said calmly. "Better. I can see clearer this way anyway. I was hoping you wouldn't wake up, but I figured I'd tie you up in case you decided to come looking for me again." I jerked my head, trying to throw him off. Terror and confusion hit me with every word he said. He held firm, pinning my body with his legs pressing down on my chest. "Stop," he said firmly. "You're safe. I'm not gonna hurt you. I just need you to stay here, okay?" He patted my cheek lightly. "Stay." He started to get off me, then paused, grinning to himself, and leaned close, whispering in my ear, "But there's something you don't know. You know what that is, you don't, do you? I do." I bit the rag in my mouth and nodded. He licked his lips. I'm gonna cut Nora's head off. My eyes widened and I screamed into the gag, thrashing hard. He chuckled softly and held me down, waiting patiently until I wore myself out, panting around the cloth. I stared at him, his toothy grin, the glinting outline of his gouged eyes bleeding through the linen. The well. The thought slammed into my chaotic mind like a truck. It was the well. He'd seen something down there. Somehow, it changed him. Suddenly, Finn raised a fist and smashed it down on my face, knocking me into darkness. I came to again, my face swollen and throbbing, vision reeling. The room was pitch black. I was still gagged, and I could feel my breathing get ragged as my nose clogged with blood. I'd suffocate if I didn't get this rag out. Slowly, over what felt like forever, I worked it with my tongue and teeth until I finally spat it out, gasping in deep, grateful breaths. I wrestled with the ropes binding me. After a few frustrating moments, I loosened them enough to free one, and a few more minutes of tearing and I was completely loose. Nora. Oh God, Nora. I bolted to her room and kicked the door open. My heart bubbled into my throat, and I stood there shaking. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Please, please, please. Tears welled up and I tore out of the cabin. Get Walter now. The night was thick. Humid air clung to my skin. The moon stared down, uncaring and cold. The fire in the camp's center was out. As I was about to burst into Walter's cabin at the end of the clearing, I heard something scream. It was Nora. I froze, motionless. The sound came from the woods. I knew where she'd gone. Biting my lip, my face twisting in mental agony, I glanced at Walter's cabin, then sprinted toward the forest, toward the well. She might have seconds left if she was still alive. I had to get to her and stop Finn. Please, God, let her be okay. Please, please, God. I stumbled down the path, barefoot, scraping against rocks and twigs, toes slamming into stones and wood. I didn't care. I didn't think about it. I flew as fast as my legs could carry me, my heart pounding harder with every step. There, I hit the bend in the path and veered left into the woods, crashing through the brush. I threw my hands up front, pushing through low-hanging branches and leaves reaching for my face. Gasping, I burst into the clearing and froze. Finn had Nora bent over the well's edge. He stood behind her, one fist gripping her hair, yanking her head back to bare her throat. His arm muscles strained as he pressed a knife to her pale skin, slicing into her slowly, back and forth, deeper and deeper. He stopped and looked up when he saw me. Oh, hey. Nora, I screamed under the moonlight. Her eyes rolled slowly to meet mine. Pain. Jesus Christ. Nora's. Hanging on, I yelled, tears streaming down my cheeks. Finn ignored my outburst, taking his time wiping sweat from his face and tightening the cloth around his eyes. This is a lot harder than I thought, he muttered. Finn, stop, it's Nora. You're killing her, I shouted. He went silent, staring at me. The blood-soaked cloth around his eyes turned black. Finally, he gestured at me with the bloody knife, one hand still clutching Nora's hair. Come join me then. I swallowed and went to lunge at him, but realized I couldn't. My knees turned to water and all my body's strength drained out. The forest seemed to crush down on me. My breath came in short gasps. I was so scared. I felt my bladder let go, warmth spreading down my legs. The well, that damn well, I couldn't even look at it. I was drowning in nightmares, wanting nothing more than to turn and run. Out of here, out of these mountains, as far from that place as I could get. Screwed, doing my best. Finn was smiling. You could, but you're scared. He tapped the well's rim with his knife. Come on, come look down it. His grin widened. "Look down the well." I mumbled, vision blurring with tears and snot pouring from my nose. "Please stop." Finn shook his head slowly. "No. Actually, I think it's time to wrap this up." He raised the knife again, pressing it to Nora's throat. She'd slumped, but as he went to keep cutting, his eyes met mine and she rasped one word: "Run." Hearing her snapped me out of the terror, face streaked with tears and mucus. I charged at Finn. With every step toward him, my body felt heavier, dragging me to the ground. I gritted my teeth, stealing adrenaline, and slammed into Finn just as he turned to me, mouth gaping in surprise. He crashed hard into the well's side, dropping the knife from his hand. We both went down. I smashed my head on a rock. Dazed. The world spun, and I heard him growl as he started getting up. "You don't know what you're doing, you dumbass," he snarled, grabbing my hair and slamming my face into the ground. I bit my tongue and howled in pain, tasting blood flood my mouth. Dizzy, I rolled onto my back and stared up at him. He stepped onto my chest and leaned down, voice rough. "You can't stop it." He sprang back fast, grabbed Nora, and hauled her up over his shoulder. He dragged them both to the well's mouth, and they fell silently into the dark. They were gone. "No," I screamed, voice breaking. Staggering, I crawled up, sobbing, begging, and gripped the well's edge. I looked down into the blackness. I looked down the well. My eyes widened, and the world seemed to stop. "Oh no," I whispered. I'd just driven from Philadelphia, PA, to Buffalo, New York with my cat Naya. The trip was pretty long, but we stayed on track for most of it. Nia and I made it all the way up to just before you cross into New York. It was around 5:30 p.m. by then, but that also meant it was pitch black outside. We'd only stopped once to grab something at McDonald's, and I quickly downed their iced tea to try and stay awake. By that point, I really had to pee. I didn't want to leave Naya in the car alone, so I put her on a leash and we walked into a gas station together. I asked, "Mind if we use the bathroom here?" The guy behind the counter said, "Sure," and Nia and I headed into the restroom. She perched on the counter while I did my business. The store wasn't exactly bustling. There were a few guys out there looking for honey buns, some tasty pastries, and cheaper cigarettes up in New York. Then there was a woman chatting with the cashier up front. She seemed like a regular, judging by how familiar they sounded with each other. Nia jumped about a foot in the air when we heard the doorknob rattle. I called out, "Sorry, it's occupied right now." My cat's a trained animal. She's been taught to handle people, stressful situations, crowds, and fairly loud noises. She hates cars, though. I glanced over at her after she leapt up. Her tail was as puffed up as it could get. She crouched low, then slid into her favorite spot on my shoulder, digging her claws into my hair and grumbling at me. She does that when she wants to get out. The doorknob rattled again, and she swiped at the door real quick, like a jab. "Still occupied," I said, but this time I wasn't laughing. Then we heard someone speak. It was a man's voice, and honestly, it made my blood run cold. They were speaking something close to my native language mixed with English. It wasn't the first time I'd heard them say, "Should I grab her when she comes out?" In my native tongue, the grammar doesn't carry as much implication as that. They'd use something similar to push it as far as I could tell through the door. "No," I thought. "The cashier's right there. We can get out." I figured her car was the blue one. Nia let out an angry noise, and I tried stroking her to calm her down. There weren't any windows in the bathroom, and my car was parked, stupidly, I'll admit, on the edge of the lot. I'd parked it a ways off from the lights because I'd left a bunch of stuff in there and didn't want it to get torched. It wasn't the blue one, though. We heard their footsteps retreat and we sat there for what felt like forever. Both of us jumped when there was a knock. "Come out quick," a voice said. "My friend will take you through the back to your car. They're standing out by the pumps." It was the cashier. I think it was the regular I'd pegged earlier. I opened the door, and she led me out back. Not the smartest move, maybe, but I wasn't sure what else to do. She opened the door, and I could see my car about 20 feet away. I wanted to bolt for it, but then I remembered I'd set the alarm with my keys. I unlocked the car with the fob, and the alarm blared. I threw myself into the driver's seat, unlocked it with the key, and hit the button to lock it back up fast. My heart was pounding as I reversed and got the hell out of there. On my way out, I noticed a guy standing by the blue car on the far side of the lot, trying to look casual while he smoked. They didn't even realize I'd slipped away. Back when I was about 3, my mom, Lena, was a late-night pizza delivery girl for a chain called Pizza Inn. They made the best chocolate chip pizzas. Lena, a woman in her late 20s, usually got off work around 3 a.m. and would come pick me up from my grandma's place when grandma couldn't watch me. Mom would often call a babysitter instead. I even remember crashing overnight in the back of the pizza shop a few times when she was working. She had a night shift at Pizza Inn one Saturday and needed to drop me off at the babysitter's around 7 p.m. right before her shift started. The babysitter, Mara, told Lena she'd meet her on the road between Mara's house and our town. Mara explained she had to be somewhere and wouldn't be home at the time, but she said I could hop in her car at the bus stop and ride along with her. When Lena spotted Mara's car and pulled over so I could go to her, I started screaming and crying. I'd never done that before. I usually got along fine with people. Mom said I was trembling, my teeth chattering and everything, when Mara touched me. I visibly flinched and bawled even louder because of Lena. I'd stayed with Mara once or twice before that night, and with a few other sitters too, but Mom swore I'd never lost it like that before or since. That night at work, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something awful had happened. She didn't like how I reacted to Mara one bit. It bugged her so much she couldn't stand it. She ended up leaving her shift early to come get me. There were no cell phones to call ahead since this was around 1987, but she sped out as fast as she could to Mara's place, which was at the end of a local country road. When she got there and knocked, Mara answered, totally shocked to see Lena. Mom said she'd gotten off work early and was just there to pick up her son. That's when Mara's face changed, and she said, "Well, you're not getting him," and tried to slam the door on Lena. But Mara was tiny and my mom was a big woman. "If you don't let me have my son, I'll kick your ass," Lena roared at Mara, shoving the door down onto her before grabbing me. I stood up. And that was it. Enough of that. "Get away from that crazy house," she said. A mother's gut in distress says a lot. I've got fractured memories tied to that place. The reality is I was molested by a naked man on a couch watching porn. I've got broken memories linked to that house. I won't go into the hazy details, but Lena believed Mara was renting out the kids she watched, maybe to feed a drug habit. Who knows? Within 9 months, Mara was dead from a heroin overdose.